Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the Friday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and today I am thrilled to welcome you to an interview with Dana Simpson. Dana is the creative force behind Phoebe and Her Unicorn, which is a comic strip and also has been collected into books and also has a couple of graphic novels mixed in with that series. We had my daughter, Junior Bandit Penelope, join in on the action. She got to ask a few questions of her favorite author. And I think you'll like how everything came together for Dana and how she made unicorns and little girls and sort of that Calvin and Hobbes kind of dynamic work for her. And she even breaks some news. So take a listen, take a look, and I'll see you on the other side. This is Dana Simpson. So I'm Mike Farah, and we have Junior Bandit Penelope with us today.
Hi.
And we are very excited to welcome author Dana Simpson to the program.
Hi. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. Hi.
No, we're very happy to have you. And we're going to kick you off with the same first question we ask everyone, which is, how did you first discover comics?
I discovered comics at a very young age. My mother had this book of Peanuts cartoons, this Peanuts Treasury, and I was reading pretty young, and I remember being like preschool age and reading through this book of Peanuts cartoons and being sort of fascinated by it and being like, it'd be fun to make something like that. I drew my own first comic strip at 5 years old, probably because of that. It was called Boo, and it was about ghosts. And I stayed very interested in comics, specifically comic strip format after that. Like I read the Sunday comics and the daily comics. As a kid, I would cut comics out and take them up all over my room. And I always thought, I always drew. I always liked to draw. I didn't think I was funny, but I wanted to be funny. I wanted to learn to be funny. And I always kind of imagined it as something I might do someday. It's a lifelong love of comics for me, starting with Peanuts. So thanks, Mom.
Is there anything from your childhood that made you want to become an artist or writer?
I think everything from my childhood made me want to become an artist or writer because that was the stuff I liked doing. I drew always. People ask me like, when did you start drawing? And the truth is, I think we all draw when we're little kids. Those of us that become artists are just the ones that don't stop. And I kind of never stopped. Like when I was really little, my mom says that when she wanted to keep me, she wanted to know where I was for a while she did something else. All she had to do was give me a pad of paper and my markers, and I'd be in the same place for like 5 hours drawing. And writing, I came to a little bit later than that, like you do, but I don't know, writing and drawing were just two things I always really liked doing and that people always told me I was good at. And so, given that some people were making money at it, like I'd read that Peanuts book and think, there's one guy that makes this, and it's his job to do that. So that's a job, and if he can have it, maybe I could grow up to have it. And there was always kind of in the back of my mind. So yeah, like my whole childhood, I liked drawing, I liked writing, and I hoped maybe somebody would pay me to do them someday.
Is there anything like you really like to draw, like one thing that you were always stuck on?
Ooh, I have always liked to draw. I've always liked to draw animals, which I think is one reason that, like, Phoebe and Her Unicorn obviously has unicorns and also things like dragons and sometimes cats, various other creatures. My previous strip was called Ozy and Millie, and everybody in that strip was an animal. The main characters were foxes. There's a lot of drawings from when I was young, of various animals. People too. I like drawing faces. So animals and people, or if you want to concede that people are animals, animals including people.
Okay.
I took drawing classes after school when I was in elementary school, and I used to he would have us drawing from photos and stuff, and I would find photos of animals or of people's faces I thought were interesting and try to draw those. But the truth is, too, something I was taught in one of those classes that has stuck with me is that the people who really stick with drawing are the people who just like drawing, who sort of like drawing anything. Like if somebody only draws spaceships, what they like is probably spaceships. But kids who like drawing will try to draw anything, and really anything is fun. But you do tend to gravitate to stuff that you're actually interested in, which is why I draw unicorns every day.
You mentioned your first comic strip, which was Ozzy and Millie, about the two foxes.
Unless you count Boo, the one I drew when I was 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think Ozy and Millie can be referred to as my first comic strip. Yeah.
Your first published comic strip, maybe?
Yeah, my first comic strip that had more than one drawing in it.
And so it was about two foxes, right? An Arctic fox and a red fox.
Yep. And Millie, the red fox, was um destructive, sort of gleefully destructive and kind of a little anarchist. And Ozzy was very calm and zen, and that was sort of the dynamic of that comic. And basically, Millie was me, and Ozzy was my spouse, or my boyfriend at the time, and we've been together a long time. And yeah, I'm not sure I knew that when I was writing, but I was like, wait, this is us. I just wrote us. Anyway, you had a question, and you didn't even get to it. And I went off on a thing, but
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to know how you came up with the concept for Ozzy and Millie, and
there
if
were
you always wanted to
characters.
create something that was sort of kid oriented, because they're sort of an elementary school, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not so much that I decided to make something kid oriented. I think that's just what I like to draw. Like a lot of my favorite comics, Calvin and Hobbes is about a kid, Peanuts is about kids. I think that's one of the things I liked about them, especially when I was a kid. But like even in adulthood, I seem to gravitate to writing about children more than I do adults. Maybe because I understand kids more than I do adults. Adults are weird. I don't fully get us. And also, adults and kids aren't really that different. It's just more fun for me to write about kids. I mean, yeah, I don't think I've ever written something with an adult main character. I guess we bore me.
Yeah, we are quite boring.
What gave you the idea for the book Phoebe and Her Unicorn?
Well, Phoebe and Her Unicorn, of course, started out as a comic strip, and then the first book is just a collection of the first strips. But there is a whole story here, and I think I'm going to tell it to you. So in 19, no, that's aging me a lot. You can edit that out or not. You can leave it there. In 2009, I won a contest. I'd stopped doing Aussie and Millie a few months earlier. After 10 years, it was like, okay, comics are fun, but I'm not making any money at this. I had an idea that I was gonna pivot to becoming like a children's book illustrator. And then a friend emailed me and was like, hey, have you heard about this contest, the comic strip superstar contest? And I had not, but it was a contest that Andrew McNeil, spoiler alert, my current publisher, was holding online it was like a talent search for comic strips. And you would enter like 2 weeks of comic strips, and people, like a panel of judges would evaluate them and then pick 10 finalists, and then the internet got to vote on the winners. And I was like, okay, well, I was going to get out of drawing comic strips, but this seems like an opportunity that I am as qualified as any person in the world to achieve. So I entered with this comic strip that was called Girl, and I had like 2 weeks to come up with 2 weeks of strips before the deadline. So the Girl was about this little girl who kind of Phoebe, kind of an early Phoebe, but basically just a drawing of me as a kid. Phoebe is a self-portrait. And she hung out in the woods behind her house, and all her friends were like talking woods animals, and they all had names like rabbit and squirrel and bird, and so they called her Girl because that's what she was. That was the whole concept, and I submitted my 2 weeks of strips, and long story short, I ended up winning. And part of winning was that I got a development contract to develop a comic strip, possibly for newspapers, and also a book contract to publish a book. So they had to put out my first book, but first I had to make one. And we went through a couple of years of development, and they didn't quite think the comic was there. I'd hand in my comics every month and be like, "How about this?" And they'd be like, "Yeah." I was told it needs to be transcendent, and I was like, "I don't know. If it's not transcendent now, I don't know. I don't know how to make this transcendent. What do you mean?" And I was getting really frustrated. I kept submitting stuff, and they would be like, "No, not quite." Or I wouldn't be that interested. I'd submit something and be like, "Yeah, I mean, this is what I have, but honestly, I don't know if I could do this every day." And then one day, I drew this one comic where the girl was talking to a unicorn. And it was meant to be just a one-off joke involving a unicorn, but there was just something inside me that kind of went, wait, that's it. Like sometimes you have an idea and it seems like somebody should have had that idea already. And this was one of those moments. It was like, there should already be a strip about a kid and a unicorn. And I was like, well, I love Calvin and Hobbes. That's about a boy and a tiger. Well, what's the girl version? A girl and a unicorn. Suddenly it seemed like this was a thing that should exist. So I excitedly wrote a bunch of strips about a kid and a unicorn and handed those in. And they were like, hey, yeah, do this. And a few months later, Phoebe and Her Unicorn started. And that's the beginning of the first Phoebe and Her Unicorn book. It was just sort of a moment that it all came together. It was like, oh, that's a strip that should exist. And also, I'm really excited about drawing unicorns every day if they'll let me do that. And they said yes, and it was brilliant. And one of those turning point moments in my creative life was like, oh, now I know what I'm going to be doing for the next forever. The strip originally was called Heavenly Nostrils because my unicorn's name is Marigold Heavenly Nostrils, which is a name I got by putting my name into an online unicorn name generator. And then they were like, you can call it Heavenly Nostrils for now, but when we launch in newspapers, they'll want to change it to something less weird. And I was like, fine. I thought they'd get used to it. But when it came time, they were like, no, we want to call it Phoebe and Her Unicorn. And I was like, okay. I didn't fight them on that. I just wanted my book and my strip to come out.
I like Heavenly Nostrils. That's I think we both laughed out loud when we first
I
said that.
prefer it too. I always have. It's funny, it's eye-catching. More than one person back in the day told me I started reading this because I was like, Heavenly Nostrils, I have to know what that is. And then, but I guess it was polarizing. Like my mother doesn't like it. She's wrong, but I suspect she speaks for a certain contingent.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about format because, and you answered a little bit of it, I think already, but I think it was a web comic, then a strip in syndicated in the newspaper. I don't know if I have the sequence right, and then ultimately has become, books. Uh, is
Yeah,
is there one format you like better than the rest, or you think is sort of the source format?
I'm going to break some news right here on your podcast
Woohoo!
because I got permission to start telling people this. Um, I'm going to say that and then take a minute to get to it. So, in answer to your question, it did start as a webcomic, kind of, in that it launched on gocomics.com, which is my publisher's comics website. And it still runs there today. But it launched there in 2012 on my birthday, coincidentally. Phoebe and I have the same birthday, April 23rd. But the plan was always to give it a newspaper launch. Like there was always the idea, but newspaper launches they cost a lot. I mean, they spend like $100,000 launching a strip or something like that. and they tend to do like one of those a year. And I had a couple things in line in front of me. So it was a couple years before we did that. The newspaper launch happened it ran for almost 3 years online before the newspaper launch happened. But the plan was always for it to be in newspapers eventually. And I've always loved the comic strip format. Like there's a reason I started working in it as a teenager when I started doing Ozy and Millie stuff. I kept doing that strip for 10 years. Then I got into Phoebe, and I've been doing that now for 13 years. I've spent basically my whole adult life and then some drawing comic strips, and I do love the format. But there have been a few Phoebe books. Most of the books are collections of the strips as they appeared online or in the newspaper. But there are a couple, The Magic Storm and Unicorn Theater, are book 6 and book 8 are both graphic novels that exist independently. I wrote them just as books. The material never appeared anywhere first. They're long form stories. I don't have to be funny every fourth panel. I can be funny when I feel like it. And I can tell longer, more complicated stories and do different things with the art. And I really do like those. And I want to do more of those. And I made a decision a few months ago. I always kind of knew that ultimately I was gonna finally leave newspaper comics to leave that 4-panel format behind and just write graphic novels about Phoebe and Marigold and about other things. I've got other ideas. And when you're doing a strip every day, there's really no time for that. The excuse me. The news today that I am finally allowed to disclose is that I am ending the daily newspaper strip. After 10 years in newspapers and 13 years of drawing them for Go Comics, I am bringing the newspaper strip to an end soon. End of this month. March 30th will be the last daily strip. I have already written the ending, but it isn't really the ending because it just means that I'm going to transition to writing graphic novels. I love comic strips. There's a reason I have spent my whole life up to now drawing them. But I feel like I've done everything I can with that. And I want to do other things. And anyway, most people who read Phoebe, I think, read it in book form. Like, I'm in a couple hundred newspapers, which is not as many as it sounds like. But newspaper comics are not what they used to be because newspapers are not what they used to be. Meanwhile, graphic novels are just huge. And my books have done really, really well, much better, I think, than the strip has done on its own. And I always sort of knew that eventually the obvious move was to just transition to writing graphic novels. I mean, if what people want from me is books, and I think the market has spoken that that's the case, then I'm going to write books and give people books. And so that's my next career move. You heard it here first. Except by the time you publish this, I'll probably have said it other places too. But you are hearing it before anybody else is officially hearing it.
Well,
and I'm really excited about this new phase of Phoebe and Marigold. But the first thing I'm going to write in this new graphic novel era is I want to do a unicorn ghost story involving Phoebe and Marigold. And I've been wanting to do that for years, and with the strip, I just haven't had the time. Like doing a graphic novel and a daily strip at the same time, you don't have any free time and you don't get a lot of sleep. And it's fun anyway, which is why I've done it twice. But the reason I haven't done it more than twice is that it's so much work. Now I can just devote myself to it and really try new things with stories, with art, and I'm really excited about this era. And I hope the fans are into it. But I'm pretty confident. A lot of people really like Magic Storm, especially, and I think it's the best Phoebe story. So there it is.
wow. Well, thank you for breaking the news. Again, we're going to have to find a way to get this out before anybody else does.
Yeah, you happen to be talking to me on the day that I got permission finally to tell people. Like I've known for months, but they needed to like talk to all the newspapers I'm in and make sure that they like were prepared for the ending and to make plans to put something else in the space. Whatever. Apparently, we were waiting to tell all the newspapers before I was allowed to say it publicly. And then this morning, my agent was finally like, they're going to let you talk about it. And I was like, finally.
Well, we are book consumers, and yeah, what was it? The Magic Storm was definitely one of our favorites.
It's probably my favorite Phoebe book. I mean, that or the first one, just because
Yeah.
it's the one that started everything. But Magic Storm is like, it's my single favorite Phoebe story, I think. And Unicorn Theater is fun too, but it's more like something in the strip, just long. Also, with like a quarter of the book is singing, which is interesting for a graphic novel.
Right.
I got to write a musical, except without any music.
Well, that's what you imagine between the panels.
Yeah. And if pressed, I will sing all of it. I'll make up a tune as I go. It won't sound great, but I'll do it.
Why did you choose a unicorn as the main character?
Well, there's a few ways I could answer that. The simplest one is because I love unicorns. I mean, who doesn't like unicorns? And uh, I've always liked imaginary animals generally. Like Ozy and Millie had a lot of dragons in it, and Phoebe has had a lot of dragons in it at various times too. I like dragons, I like unicorns. I I think imaginary animals are fun. They're fun to draw, and I like imagining what their personalities are like. And unicorns have always been one of my favorites. Another way of looking at it is that that was the idea after I handed in other ideas for a year and a half. The unicorn idea was the one my publisher liked. So that's the one we ended up doing. But I'm glad that's the one they liked because it's the one I liked. I wouldn't have had as much fun with a non-unicorn version of it. I mean, Marigold is just really fun to draw and fun to write. Like she's all swoopy lines and she's so delightfully arrogant. She's like the most arrogant part of my personality without any of the other parts, without the voice that goes, yes, but here's all the ways that you're bad. Like Marigold is just unabashed self-love, and I love that about her. And that's very unicorn. Like, um, so one of my favorite books slash movies is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. And I've had the honor of knowing Peter. He wrote the introduction to book one. And in the beginning of that book, he says the unicorn lived in a lilac wood and she lived all alone. And he talks about how unicorns tend to live in forests next to like reflecting pools so they can gaze at their own beauty because they know they're the most beautiful and magical creatures. And I was like, I can make that funny. Like that's kind of funny on its own. And that's where the opening of Phoebe, where Marigold is staring at her reflection and can't leave because she can't look away, and it's actually a real problem for her, and only gets out of it when Phoebe accidentally hits her with a rock. That's to me, that's the logical, funny extension of what Mr. Beagle wrote, and uh, I find unicorns delightful, and I like drawing them, and I like writing about them, and I like thinking about them. There's another answer to that question, which is at the time I was watching a lot of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Great show, especially the first few seasons. And
We love that show too.
yeah, I'd been drawing fan art of I have a pony OC. In fact,
Who's that?
this is a plush version of me as a My Little Pony character. It was made for me as a gift at a My Little Pony convention I appeared at once. See, my cutie mark is a drawing tablet. So
Cool.
yeah, like I had unicorns on the brain at the time anyway. I had magic horses on the brain anyway. So I had recently like been drawing horses. Horses are hard, but I had gotten good at them recently. So it was a convergence of things that made me end up drawing unicorns for the last 13 years and probably the foreseeable future.
Did you ever horseback ride or like have anything to do with horses?
I have ridden a horse a couple times. I never had a horse or anything. My mother did. My mother grew up with she had a horse as a kid, and she still talks about her horse a lot from when she was a kid. I never had my own horse, but I did get to ride horses a few times, and I thought it was really fun. I wasn't necessarily a total horse girl. I had my best friend in fifth grade was a total horse girl, and she drew horses all the time. And I wasn't as much of a horse girl as that. I see you pointing at yourself. Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
horseback ride.
If I cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I rode horses a few times. I always had kind of a general affection for them. I always thought they were pretty.
I wanted to ask because we've spoken to a number of comic strip creators, and you mentioned this already that it can get to be quite the grind in
The
terms of
novelty wears off and you're still just doing it every day and trying to come up with new ideas and trying very hard not to repeat yourself, which is hard.
right. How far ahead do you work on this strip? I know it's sort of now coming to a close,
Yeah,
but
coming to a close now. I mean, the furthest ahead I've ever been is like 12 weeks. Um, I am very jealous of my cartoonist friends who are further ahead than that. I have one friend who does a web strip, so he could do it all the night before if he wanted to, and yet he's a year and a half ahead. And it's like, how do you even do that? You have a day job. How are you doing that? I have all the free time, and I've never been a year and a half ahead. Um, the most ahead I've ever been is 12 weeks. I'm only allowed like the I have to be at least 2 weeks ahead on the dailies and 7 weeks ahead on the Sundays, or it's a problem. Um, like they need to get it to the newspapers, so they need that kind of uh, advanced time. There's probably a word for that that I'm not thinking of, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so um, I'm never as far ahead as I'd like to be. There have been a few times that I've managed to get more ahead than that, but usually I'm working pretty close to that deadline, and that's stressful, and that's my fault.
Do any of the stories come from your life?
Most of the stories come from my life in some way. Well, I don't know about most, but many. Um, the example I've often used when I get asked that question is like the storyline where they go to Max's birthday party and it's in an arcade, and the reason is that I had just gone to my friend John's birthday party in an arcade. So that was what was on my mind. There's a lot of other stories like that where something happens to me or I do something, or a lot of the time I remember stuff from my childhood. Like I mine my own childhood for material constantly. A lot of what happens to, especially the Phoebe storylines, are usually either stuff that I remember doing or stuff that's happening in my life now. Because Phoebe's stories tend to be a lot more grounded. I always thought of that as kind of the dynamic, kind of the duality of the strip. That Phoebe's got this very like ordinary life. She goes to school. She has to do kid stuff. She just has piano lessons. And Marigold's stories tend to be a little more fanciful, like we have to visit the dimension of the goblins or something. Marigold storylines are more like the ones where I just imagine something about unicorns and then write that. Although there are Marigold storylines that are based on real stuff in my life too. Like if Marigold is experiencing something like jealousy or loneliness or Marigold has the same emotions we do. And Marigold stories sometimes come from my own life in that way. It's like I explore something I've felt. What would it be like for Marigold to be feeling it? How would a unicorn experience jealousy or loneliness or disappointment? What would cause that? And I think those are the moments Marigold is really relatable when she feels stuff we would feel. She's this magnificent, beautiful creature with a ton of confidence, but she feels the same things we feel. She has some of our frailties too.
When you did the strip about the Electra Fairy and the unicorn election, did that come from like real life? Was that a
Yeah, kind of. But also I feel like the unicorn election storyline also just came from I think it was my spouse. My spouse and other people close to me often say stuff that becomes Phoebe strips. they either say it as a suggestion, like, hey, has this ever happened? Or I bet unicorns do this. Or sometimes they'll just say something, I'll think, that's funny. Can I steal it and put it in my strip? I believe the unicorn election storyline came from something my spouse said. They said, I bet when unicorns have elections, they all vote for themselves. And I was like, I bet they do. How would that work? And I got a whole storyline out of that. And the idea that all the unicorns vote for themselves except for like Florence and Lord Splendid Humility, who are like the two humble unicorns. And Florence is really humble, and Lord Splendid Humility is performatively humble. Um, that's its own kind of arrogance. He's one of my favorite characters. He's so ridiculous. Um, and that became a whole storyline. I don't tend to include a lot of real world politics in Phoebe because that's a depressing subject, and it's kind of my escape from it. Yeah, a thumbs down, absolutely. Unicorns can't do thumbs down, but horns down, I suppose. Yeah, so I feel like the ultimate answer to your question is not really from real politics, because I don't want to think about that. It was more just a funny idea that my spouse suggested. We've been together a very long time. We met in college and we've been married forever. And at this point, we kind of finish each other's thoughts. And so my spouse will be like, this would be a good Phoebe idea. And I'll be like, yeah, I wish I'd thought of it, but now I don't have to.
Marigold Heavenly Nostrils is a very unique character, it's a unique character name, of course, which you told us about. Um, is her personality based on anyone you know, or is it just sort of a whole cloth invention and only the sassiness of unicorns brought it
Oh,
out?
she's me. Like Phoebe is a direct self-portrait, but Marigold is a self-portrait too. Like Marigold is the part of me that, like, the voice inside of me that goes, hey, you're awesome. And I hope we all have that inner voice, even if it's competing with a lot of other inner voices. Marigold is my ego and self-love and self-regard. And well, Ozzy and Millie was kind of a conversation with myself. Millie, the destructive impulse, Ozzy, the calm impulse, kind of interacting with each other. And Phoebe is kind of a conversation with myself. Phoebe and Her Unicorn is kind of a conversation with myself too, with Phoebe representing the kind of the part of me that's still a kid, but also just the part of me that's me. Like Phoebe is my mother reads the strip every day and she's like, well, Phoebe is you. She says what you would say, and my mom would know. Marigold is less directly me, but she is that voice inside of me, that sort of, you're great, you can do it kind of inner cheerleader voice, isolated as a single character. Um, not to keep name dropping, but the second book has an introduction by Lauren Faust, who created Friendship is Magic. And in that introduction, Lauren said that Marigold is a very positive I'm paraphrasing. Marigold is a very positive representation of something that often is negatively represented, like vanity, self-love, self-regard. And Marigold's arrogant in a way that's, she's not like, I'm better than you, so bleh. Marigold is more like, I'm great, so let's all share me, and we can all enjoy me together. She is a very like benevolent version of self-love, and I think she represents something that is good to have some. It's good to have an inner Marigold, and I think people should listen to their inner Marigold and not be ashamed of it. You are great, you are awesome. Your inner Marigold is right.
Yeah, I think that attitude sort of helps Phoebe also.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference in Phoebe as a character, like before Marigold versus after. Um, like that's the big transition in the strip for Phoebe. I think the first year of the strip, Phoebe is still sort of in awe of the fact that she knows a unicorn now. But before Marigold came along, we've seen this, that Phoebe was kind of a lonely kid. Like her one friend is Max, who is also kind of a lonely kid and also is kind of lives in his own head a lot. So a lot of the time Phoebe's just by herself, and she was alone in the woods the day she met Marigold, and I think she did that a lot. And then she meets Marigold, and suddenly it's like, I must be pretty cool because this unicorn is choosing to be around me. Especially after the first year when she released Marigold from her obligation. Like for the first year, Marigold is there because Phoebe wished for her to be her best friend, and Marigold has to honor it. But Phoebe lets her out of the wish, and Marigold stays anyway. And for Phoebe, that's sort of like, oh, I must be really cool because this unicorn is now here with me by choice. And I think Phoebe has had a lot more confidence since that moment. Like it doesn't matter to her that much what other people think of her because a unicorn likes her.
How did you come up with the idea for the goblins? They're really funny.
I can't take full credit for that. The goblins are partly a creation of me, obviously. I mean, I take partial credit for them. I'm the one that's been writing them all this time. But the idea for there to be goblins came partly from my friend Richard, who Richard is also a children's writer. He wrote the book Please Don't Tell My Parents I'm a Supervillain, among other things. Richard Roberts, and he said he kind of came up with the idea that there should be these weird goblin creatures and they should abduct Dakota, and that could be a storyline, and that they should. I think Blart may have been his idea. The thing goblins say, the thing goblins say exclusively. There's an audiobook of Magic Storm, and it has actors in it. And I'm actually on it as every goblin voice. So I got to go into a studio one day and just say blart every way I could. Blart, blart, blart. Into a microphone for like 3 hours. It was great. The design of the sorry.
I said that sounds pretty fun.
It was great. I wish I got to do stuff like that more. Maybe if we eventually get to make a TV show, they'll let me do that stuff. The design of the goblins is partly my sister Nicole, who is also a great artist, and she drew me this goblin when I was working on them. I was like, draw me a goblin. What do they look like to you? And she drew this sort of Muppety thing that's a lot like the goblins you know now. And I was like, that's great. I'm using it. And she was like, great. Just tell people it was my idea. So I'm telling you.
Duly noted.
Yes. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Richard. I'm not paying you anything for your ideas, but you get paid in gratitude.
Yes, and credit on podcasts.
Yeah, so on podcasts, I will tell everyone you're great. Nikki and I are working on our own graphic novel that we're going to try to sell this year. That's another one of the things I want to do now that I'm transitioning to graphic novels, is I've got this book I want to do with my sister.
I wanted to ask you about that, actually. That's the next question was that what how does the process change between doing a daily strip and doing a graphic novel? Obviously, they're pretty different.
Yeah,
But how do you approach each in a different way?
they're different experiences. I think the process is fundamentally different for a graphic novel versus a strip, because in the strip, I've never felt like I really have to tell complicated, coherent stories. Most of the stories are, it's at most a few weeks, which in a book is like, I don't know, like maybe 30 pages or something. They're short-ish, and they don't necessarily have to go anywhere. They just have to be funny. Like a strip is sort of hanging out with the characters. You can tell stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a structure, but it's not the best medium for that, and your audience doesn't really expect that in a comic strip. The characters can just sort of live their lives day to day. And so when I start a story in Phoebe, maybe I know where it's going, but I don't really plan it out. I just sort of start writing, and the emphasis is on what's funny, and I just sort of assume we'll get there, and it seems to work. When I'm doing a graphic novel, that's different. I have to write an outline for it. So that goes through multiple drafts. I also have a page count I'm shooting for, which is a limitation I don't have in comic strips. I can sort of go on for as much or as little time as I want, and then I'll just move on to the next story. In a graphic novel, you have one story, and I'm shooting for a page range. Like, so you have to pace it right. Pacing is hard. It's not something I really do that much in comic strips. It's just sort of, as long as the action keeps moving and the jokes keep being there, people are along for that ride. In a book, the story needs to not feel rushed or slow, and it has to get where it's going. It has to hit certain points at certain times. It's a lot more structured. There's a lot more pre-planning involved. And that was hard at first. When I was doing Magic Storm, it was the first time I'd done that. And it was almost like relearning how to write comics, which was fun about it, but it was harder than I thought it would be. So I read uh like what other people had said about the process of doing it. I talked to friends that have written graphic novels and got their advice, and it was like a whole other part of the craft that I had to learn. And that's one of the things that's exciting for me now. I feel like I know, this sounds a little arrogant to say it this way, but I feel like I know everything there kind of is to know about writing comic strips. I've been doing it my whole adult life and then some. And graphic novels are like in this undiscovered frontier that I've only kind of dabbled in, that I'm looking forward to really plunging myself into and learning the tricks of it.
What's your new book that you think that you're writing with your brother?
Sister. And um, she and I have, it's sort of it's a sort of a superhero thing. So I hope people aren't super sick of that. It's the working title is Project Super Sister. And so it's about these two girls who are sisters. One of them is genetically engineered and half cat, and the other one is a robot. And because dad is a geneticist and mom is a roboticist, and they had a bet on who could design the best superhero daughter. And it's the story of these two girls finding their way in both, like, going to school, being as different as that and not being able to hide it, and also learning how to do good in the world as with their super abilities. And it's a fun story that Nikki and I have been kicking around for years, and I really hope people like it. I have found that, like, the early stuff we've shown people seems to excite them. I hope they're not just telling me that. I hope it's sincere, because Nikki and I are excited about it. So I really hope people like it.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's different than anything I've done before. Nikki is a really super talented artist. She doesn't have like a comics career the way that I do, but she would like to have her name on a book, and she really does bring a lot to the table that I don't have. My comics are really talky. Nikki is much better at writing and drawing like action-y stuff, which will be a whole dimension to this book that nothing I've done before has really had. I'm excited about that. I also have a graphic novel memoir about my childhood that I've been working on for years that I want to finally finish. And I, of course, have a bunch of ideas for new Phoebe books that I want to do. So it's going to be, I'm going to be plunging into this with, uh, jumping into the deep end on graphic novels right away. I assume I'm ready.
What do you like to do when you're not working?
You mean I'm supposed to be not working some of the time? I like to do lots of things. I like to read, obviously. I sometimes like to play video games, although I have to be careful, because if I get really into one, I like do nothing else for like a week. I ride my bike sometimes. I no, that's it. That's all I do. I mean, I also just really like to draw, like, it's nice when I don't have to draw for work and I get to draw for myself.
What is the old saying, is that if you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life?
Yeah, that's not true at all. If you're doing what you love and you monetize it and you have deadlines and people have expectations of you, it's a job like any other job. Like it's still more fun than if you didn't like your job, but it still is a job and it has the same stresses and stuff. And there are days I have to do it when I don't really want to. I was like, I'm not feeling it today, but I have a deadline, so here we go. I don't mean to discourage people from pursuing jobs that they love. You absolutely should do that, but it's not the same thing as just drawing for yourself. It is a job. It's just a fun job.
Yeah.
Um, so do you do any sports?
I am very bad at sports, but I do like to ride my bike, and I'm pretty good at a few things. Or what am I good at sports wise? What sports am I good at?
Mini golf.
I'm weirdly great at mini golf.
Yeah.
That counts.
I actually really like to swim. I have to cover up my hair so the pink doesn't all wash out. But I discovered a few years ago that I really like swimming, and the college pool near here has days that you can just go do it.
Is camping a sport?
Is camping a sport? We really like camping.
Sure. We make the
Yeah.
rules on our own podcast.
It involves some physical stuff like hiking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was never much of a sports kid though. I was never very good at I wanted to be. I wished I was good at athletic stuff, and I never really was, and that was discouraging. And then my brother's great at it, so he showed me.
You sort of went into your next projects already, which was one of my last questions. But it sounds like you have a lot of irons in the fire, and as
I
you
do
said,
have a lot of things I'm looking forward to doing project-wise. Phoebe will never end. Well, I mean, I guess it will at some point, all things do, but like this is the end of Phoebe is not in sight. I'm going to be writing new stories about Phoebe and Marigold forever. For as long as my brain and my right hand still work, there's going to be more Phoebe. And I want to try some new things with Phoebe. And among other things, I've never written an illustrated novel, but I bet I could. Like actual print just with a lot of illustrations. Like I know that Lincoln Purse, who does Big Nate, has done a few of those, and I've read them and gone, I could do that. And my publisher would love that from me, I think. Yeah, more Phoebe, more non-Phoebe stuff. Autobiographical novel book with my sister. I'd like to write a children's picture book. I've never published one except for the Phoebe and Marigold one. I did illustrate one once. Maybe I'll do more illustration for other people if they want me to. And
Yeah.
so many. I'm looking forward to a lot of new challenges, and there's a lot of possibilities, and I'm excited about it.
as are we. Where can fans follow you on social, online? You want to get updates on your new work?
Yeah, people can read Phoebe and Her Unicorn. It probably will be in repeats after a while. Although I should say I'm ending the daily strip. I'm going to still do Sunday comics. So every week there will be a new Phoebe Sunday strip. I'm just not going to do it 7 days a week anymore. That seems like the right amount of work for having a bunch of other projects and one strip a week. I can do that. GoComics.com will have those. And you can find Phoebe and Her Unicorn books and also Ozy and Millie books. There are 2 of those. Basically, everywhere that books are sold, people ask me, where can I buy your book? And where can't you buy my book? They have them at Target. But don't go to Target, support your local indie bookstore. And you can find me online. There is an official Phoebe and Her Unicorn Facebook that I don't update as much as I ought to, but big stuff goes on there. I am also on Blue Sky. My personal one is danacorn.bluesky.social. There's also danasimpson.com on Blue Sky is my professional account, where you can, if you're not interested in hearing me talk about whatever, you can go there and just hear the important stuff about Phoebe and other upcoming projects. So
Sure.
I'm very easy to find.
All right, we're back. You know, sometimes we break news. Every once in a while. You may have heard it, but yeah, Dana is ending the daily comic strip of Phoebe and Her Unicorn in favor of graphic novels. So I think that's a great move. We really loved the two editions within the series of books that were the graphic novels rather than the collections, although we love the collections as well. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Thank you, Dana, for coming on. Thanks to Penelope for participating and doing such a great job with the questions. We'd love to have Dana on again. And thank you all out there for listening and for viewing, for rating, reviewing, subscribing, doing all that great stuff that helps us keep going, keep bringing you these amazing interviews. That's it for this week of the Dollar Bin Bandits. We'll see you next issue and next week. Peace.